Alright, this session is being recorded, and I'll share my screen. All right. So today we'll be writing some more code, and if we can get done with today's topic, we'll start with the topic following this, which is a little theoretical but very important. So what we're going to look at today is recursion. We have touched upon this topic in past few times already. Um, Recursion has, it's a very small topic to discuss, but still it has a very high exam weightage based on how much content we have on this topic, because it's a very subtle subject to talk about. Recursion basically takes advantage of the fact that a complex problem can be solved by breaking the complex problem into smaller solvable subproblems and then eventually combine the result into the final result. So that's a very neat idea. Almost all recursive solutions can be solved using loops, which is iteration. Um, but still, we'll see in a lot of cases, recursion makes things very simple. A big loop gets collapsed into like just few lines of code when recursion is used. So let's dive deep into this subject and try to understand it one more time. So what is recursion? Recursion is a method calling itself again and again. So recursive method is a method that calls itself. So it'll call itself and eventually it'll exit out. A recursive methods contain at least one base case which halts the recursion. So as the method calls itself, the call can go very deep. It can keep calling itself again and again. So if there is no break condition, eventually your computer will run out of memory, because every time a method calls itself, computer saves the current state into memory and then goes to the next level, and then saves that into memory and then goes to the next level. So if we never exit from our method, our computer will keep saving these calls in different in memory and eventually will run out. So a recursive method must have at least one base case which halts the recursion. There could be compound base cases, but essentially somewhere the recursion should end, else our program will not work. Yeah, so without a break condition, recursion will eventually just be an infinite loop. Parameter values capture the progress of recursion. So method has parameters, right? You can pass parameters to the method, and within the method you can also declare local variables. And these parameters passed and the local variables in the method, they store the current state. So when a method calls itself again, whatever is the value of these variables is saved in the memory, and then call is made. So when we come back to the previous level, we have those values already saved. And recursion breaks a large problem into small solvable subproblems. We have seen this again and again, and we'll revisit one more time and see how a complex problem was made extremely simple just because recursion was used. Recursion can be used for string, array, array list, etc., etc. When it comes to traversal. So when you're traversing through a certain data structure, could it be array list, the linked list, or could be anything which is traversable. Let it be graph or anything. Recursion can be used there. So essentially, loop and recursion can be interchanged. All right, so let's write a program, and this is it in recursion. More learning will come on this topic by actually practicing it. it is essentially just a function call or a method call, and then with practice you get a hang of it. So let's revisit. You know what? Let's save revisiting for. Okay, let's revisit quicksort and merge sort real quick, and we'll see how recursion is in play here. So the merge sort that we just went over, which breaks a problem or array into two halves, and kind of sorts one half, sorts the other half, comes back and merges the sorted halves together. So you can see this is a piece of recursive code right there. It just keeps calling itself for the left subarray, right subarray, and then whatever is the result is merged at every level. And then the state of this level is saved in these variables, mid and these low and high variables. So when the method calls itself and comes back, it has these values stored from the previous level. So when a method calls itself, we can visualize it as it goes to a different level, a higher level, and then eventually it'll come back to the lower level. And whenever it comes back, it'll have its values stored. So such a non-intuitive algorithm is essentially implemented in 5 lines. Same with quicksort. If you look at quicksort is same here, same thing. We do a partition, and then the partition breaks the array into two halves, two parts, left and right, and then we call the method again and again for each side. And we see that quicksort, which is a little more complex algorithm to implement, can in fact be implemented in 4 lines because recursion is used. You guys can, as a mental exercise, can try implementing these two algorithms using loop, and you will realize it is not that simple compared to recursive implementations. So now, when we understand that recursion can be a neat solution, let's write some program. Now, last time we implemented I think we implemented find elements. Okay, like right here. So we implemented something called as a linear search, wherein what we did was we said find names with matching characters, right? And then the way we did that is we just went over the whole list one by one, and the moment we found names that matched a given character, we kept adding it in a list. All right. So this was a very it's kind of a linear search, which is we have a data set and we just go from one end to another end and keep finding element. It's kind of a brute force. So now let's look at another neat way of finding elements. It's called the binary search. Why is sorting and searching a big deal in computer programming? Is because at the end of it, a program is a bunch of data which is manipulated throughout the time period of when a program runs. And this data that we are managing could be one or multiple data sets. We very often sort them. We very often search for things in them. In fact, search is so ubiquitous in our life that we take it for granted. As an example, using GPS, when we try to find direction from between point A and B, there might be thousands and thousands of roads, and each road will have so many turns and dead ends and so on and so forth. And there will be traffic, freeways, toll roads. There are so many combination of things that can happen between point A and point B, and still your GPS can find the route an optimal route from point A to B within a matter of a few seconds. We don't appreciate the fact that the amount of computing it might be taking, the amount of streets the algorithm has to go through would be so many that just a linear search will not do. Every time, if someone is searching for directions, you can't have a computer which looks at all possible combination of routes and find the best one. It's just practically not possible. Um, Searching is a very studied thing in computer science. Similar to that, now when we are having this lecture session online, you all are sitting at home and you all are kind of able to see the screen and hear my voice and communicate back. Your computer is able to reach to my computer through so many different via like Wi-Fi wires, routers, and so many different things happening in between, and still we almost are communicating in real time. So that's the power of searching, and a lot of research has have been done in this field. So we will not get into the details of all of the other types of searching, but we'll look at binary searching, and we'll see how easy it is. Give me one second. My computer monitor died. Okay. Damn. Okay, fine. So I'll quickly use whiteboard. Let me know if I'm not audible. Um, but here, if I can have all of your attention. Awesome. So let's think of our data set here, which is an array of certain elements. Um, let's say it's 50 minus 10, 0, 7, some 13, and let's say 11, right? The question
We can hear you, but your whiteboard's very blurry.
is still very blurry. Okay. Very interesting.
For me, at least. I don't know about the others.
Yeah, it's pretty blurry for me too.
Yeah, it's very smooth.
It's blurry. Okay. Alright, let me reset my router, I guess. Give me one moment and I'll be back.
Hmm?
Is it any better, guys, or it's still blurry?
No, it's a lot better now.
Okay, I think something happens during the evening hours around here, and my network just almost dies. Sorry for that. But if it starts getting blurrier, like not usable my computer screen, I will try to explain it there. So let me know. I hope for now it's kind of okay. So we have this array of a bunch of elements, 50, minus 10, 0, 7, 13, and 11, just random numbers. And then let's say we need to find out if this array has 11 in it or not. So far what we have done is we look through each element. Is this 11, that 11, blah, 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 till we find 11, and we say, oh yeah, we found 11. Yes, 11 is in the array. So now let's say if you want to find if 12 is in the array or not. So we start looking at each element and say, oh, well, 12 is not there in the array. So we literally went through, for every search, we go through every element of the array, the one after the other. So if our array length is n elements, then for every search, the result is going to take n comparisons. So our complexity is at least O of n, right? Can we do better? Can we find out if things are there or not faster than this? And yes, the solution is yes. The answer is yes, and it's using recursive. Well, not really recursive. It's called binary search. So for that, what we do is we take the array, and then using one of the sorting mechanism that we have learned, we can 336. We can sort the array. So our sorted array will look like negative 10, 0, 7, and then 11, 13, and 15. So we take our array and then we sort it into a sorted form. And now let's say the question is 11 present in the array or not? So what we'll do is we'll find where the half of this array is. So if the length of array is n, so we'll find where n by 2 is. So in this case, it is 6. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. So which is 0, 1, 2 essentially. So this is our half of the array, and we'll see if element here is that greater than what we are searching or less than. So is 7 greater than 11? No, 7 is less than 11. Now as the array is sorted, 11 cannot be on the left of 7. It will always be on the right because the array is sorted. So 11 is bigger than 7. It must be on the other half. So now we look at this portion of the array and find the half of it. How many elements in here? So we already know that 7 did not match. So we don't need to compare this. So we try to find 11 in this range, right? So now how many elements? 3 elements in here. 3 divided by 2 is 1. So 0 and 1. So this is our half. And we compare, is this equal to 11? So 13 is not equal to 11, but 11 is less than 13. So as the number we are comparing is less than 13, it must be on the left. it cannot be on the right because it's a sorted array. The next element will always be greater than or equal to 13. So it means now we have looked at 13 and that's not a match, and the result must be on the left. So now we say we'll compare between these two elements, which is we'll compare the one element with 11 and see if that matches. And we have a match here. So we did find 11. How many comparisons did we do? We checked with 7 is one comparison. We checked with 13 is second comparison. And we checked with 11 and we found the result in 3 comparisons. That's it. Versus if we had to search 11 linearly in this array here, it would have been at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 comparisons. So we found the result in half the comparisons. Now, even when the array was sorted, finding 11 linearly would have been still 1, 2, 3, 4 comparisons. So we still saved one comparison, right? So definitely, this binary search is faster because we're doing less comparisons. How fast is it? It is actually log to the base 2 of n. Base 2 is not required, so log n times faster. A rule of thumb to know complexity of an algorithm is every time if we break our problem into halves and we work on just one half at a time, then it will be kind of it'll have some kind of a logarithmic scale to it. Now we did that for 11. Let's repeat the same thing for number 12, let's say, and we have our array and we want to find if number 12 is in the array or not. How would we do that? So again, we go at the middle of this array, it will be 7. We compare 7 with 12. Are they equal? They're not equal. Is 12 less than 7? No, it is not less than 7. So it must be greater or equal. So it must be greater. So everything bigger than 7 is going to be to the right because the array is sorted. So we compare the right half of the array, which is, we've already seen 7. So the element next and to the end of array. Between these two, we'll compare. So when we do this, we find the half of this sub-array, that is 13. We'll compare 13 with 12. Are they equal? They are not equal. Is 12 greater than 13? 12 is not greater than 13. So it must be on the right of 13. What is right of 13 is 11. So now we are comparing between 11 and 11, which is comparing with one element. And we compare this 12. Are they equal? They're not equal. We have already seen everything to the right of 11. There is no 12. So there must not be 12 in the array at all. So we'll return back saying the result is not found, or the element is not there. So what did we do? We did few things over and over. We broke the problem into halves, right? And then we looked at each half in a certain way. First we did is compare the element. Let's say the n. The comparison is n equal to m, where m is our search. Are they equal? If they are equal, we just return true. Yeah, we found a match. If it is not equal, then either it must be greater or smaller, right? So if n is smaller than m, so in this case, when n was 7 and n was 12, is 7 smaller than n? It is 7 is in fact smaller than n. Yes. So we need to find in the other subarray. So we'll say find number 12 between whatever my nth element is and n plus 1 element, because we've already seen the nth element to the end of the array. Now, if that's also not true, then m must be greater than n. That's the only case remaining. So in that case, we'll do a find number 12 between n minus 1. So we have seen that, so n minus 1 to start of the array, right? So it is that simple. And we can see that this becomes a very recursive way of solving this problem. We just keep calling find again and again, right? So let's quickly write this program to get a hang of it. Okay, there it is. I hope you all can see my screen. And from a previous code, I have this one package called ArrayList. You can use any other package if you want. And in there, create a new Java class called binary search. So we can use a list in any traversable data set. So for simplicity's sake, we'll just use an array. So we'll say public static so our method should return true or false. If it finds if it can find the element, it will return true. And if it doesn't find the element, it will return a false, right? So boolean, and then find what? So we'll have an integer type data structure. In this data, search for some string, right? So that's our skeleton for search method. Now we are going to use a recursive mechanism. So then coming back to here, what we have realized is when it is a recursive mechanism, the recursive mechanism should have a breakpoint. And the first thing technically should be a breakpoint. At what point does the recursion stop? What is the exit strategy? So in this case, what is our exit strategy? Well, our exit strategy is that we are down to just one element comparison, right? So which means when we break our array into two halves, we have a lower bound and then we have a higher bound, right? So when do we stop recursion? When the higher bound has crossed over the lower bound, which means we have come all the way over the lower. It means we have seen everything that is after the lower bound. So there's no point in going forward. So that's when we stop, right? So that is our end condition, is when the two high and low swap. It means we have come to an end of a recursion. And all right, so let's do that. Okay. So Boolean is not very intuitive. It just gives us true or false. Let's return the or maybe, you know what, let's keep it Boolean for now. Doesn't matter. So we'll write our recursive method here. Public. We'll keep it private. Doesn't matter. We'll keep it private. Static, and then Boolean, and we'll call it binary search. And then what will be the parameters? Integer and data, and will be like there'll be a lower bound, and then yeah, let's have a lower bound and then a higher bound. We'll just call it high, and then the number to be found, right? We'll just find this number in my data that I'm passing. So first thing we write in recursion is a break condition. So when should our loop stop is when our lower bound is greater than higher bound, or we can rewrite the same thing by saying if higher bound has become less than the lower bound. Both are the same meaning. It is they both have crossed over. So which for simplicity's sake, we'll say when the lower bound has crossed the higher bound, then we return false. We did not find the element. We looked at everything, we didn't find it. Else, what do? The first thing we do is find the where what is the half of the given array, right? So we'll say integer where is the middle ground is high, low divided by 2 is where the half of the array is going to be, right? And then now we'll compare. So as we said, okay, either there are only three conditions possible. Either the element at the middle index matches what we are looking for, or that element is less than what we're looking for, or finally it is greater than what we're looking for, right? So we'll exactly write what we have discussed here. So we'll say if in my data dot where whatever is at the middle index is equal to whatever I'm finding, then return true. I found an element, so element exists in the data set. Now, if that's not the case, then what do? So we check if the second condition is if the element at the middle index is less than what we're looking for. So if data at its middle index is less than what we are looking for, it means the data must be in the if 12 that we're looking for is if 7 is less than 12, then 12 must be on the left of on the right of 7. So we'll say find, or we'll say binary search data, but this time search it between where? So middle element plus 1. So we say we have already seen that the element next to it plus 1 and all the way to whatever the higher bound is, right? And then we say what is to be found, the element that we're looking for. We say return whatever is found in the right half. Right? Find in the right half. Similarly, if neither of the condition is true, then the only condition which might be true in this case is whatever we are finding is greater than the data at the middle index. So we'll simply say return binary search data, and then what are the bounds here? So between the lower bound and middle minus 1, and then what do we do? We find the element in there. This is it. This does the binary search for us, and then here we call our binary search implementation, and we say find in the data between 0 and whatever the length is, minus 1, because array is 0 index based, search the element, and then whatever is the result, return that to the user. Okay. So let's quickly write a program to test it. We'll call it public, so we can call it from the main public static void. We'll call it run. So we can start the program here, and let's create a data set here. So let's say we'll call it int search. We'll find number 50 if it exists in the data set or not. And what is our data set? Our data set, let's call it int data equal to, we'll just put some random numbers. In fact, for binary search, our data set must be sorted. So we'll just randomly have a sorted array here. So I'll just put 10 through 90. 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. All right. So I have a bunch of elements in the array. And now I'll say print out system dot out dot print line is a search string, whatever search number present in data set. Right? The question is whatever we are searching present in the data set, and then we call find, and then we pass data to it, and we say we are searching for 50 in this. So because within this so far. Let's go to main. In that case, it's hello. Okay, so there's my main, and I'm going to say my class is binary search. Run the program, and then when I run the program, we are looking for 50 in the data set. So is 50 present in data set? It is true. So yes, it is present. Now let's change it to something else. Let's say 100. Is that present? The result expected is false. And then we get false. So it does work, and then this is as simple as binary search is using recursion. Right? Any questions?
In the top for public static boolean find, what's the return statement? Oh, return. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Could you explain the binary search part again?
So what binary search does is you give it an array, and so it can. So essentially, the idea is to find the middle of the array or data set, and then compare that value to what you are trying to find. Now, as your data set is already sorted, let's say in this case we are looking for 12, and our array element at the middle of it is 7. So we compare 12 with 7. So only 3 conditions can happen. Either both will match, or 12 will be greater than 7, or 12 will be less than 7. Right? There's no fourth case. So if our middle element matches, we have found the element, which is return true or return the index. Now, if there's no match, then we see either what we're looking for is bigger or smaller than 7. Now, in this case, 12 is bigger than 7. Now, as this is a sorted array, everything bigger than 7 is going to be always in the on the right. It can never be in the left, right? So 12 must be somewhere. If it exists in the array, it must be somewhere after 7 all the way to the end. So instead of looking at the remaining array, we go to the right half of the array. And so what we have done is we have broken down a big array into two halves, and we have decided by elimination that what we're looking for must only be in the right side, right half. So let's say if we are looking for 6 in this, and the middle is 7, do they match? It doesn't match. So 6 must be on what part of the array? It must always be on the left side, because this array is sorted. 6 is less than 7, so it will be, if it exists, it must be on the right. Now let's say if we were, so we don't have to look on the other side at all, because we just look between these two elements for our result. Now let's say if we are looking for 7 and the middle element is 7, well, we found the element, we just return. We don't even have to look anywhere else. So every time we find the half of our data set, and we compare that element with what we're looking for. If it is equal, then we have found the element. If it is less, then the element must be on the left half. If it is greater, the element must be on the right half. So
Okay,
let's say,
but Mhm.
go ahead.
So like where does it repeat? Because I don't see like a for statement or if statement anywhere. Like I don't get how it
Um,
just worked properly without the if.
okay, so if you look at the code here, in the binary search method, line number 10, that's our break condition, right? So that's where our recursion ends. Now we compare, we find the middle of the array, right? We do high
That's
plus
one other
low.
question I have. So in
Yes.
the first line it says high is less than low. I mean low is greater than high. But
Mhm.
how would it know what's the low integer and what's the high integer?
Okay, fine. So when we call the find method, it calls a binary search and it passes 0 and what the length of array, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Parameter.
Yeah, that
So it
makes sense.
starts with low equal to 0 and high is equal to, in
Yeah.
this case, it must be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So, so is 0 greater than 5? No. So it will go in and now we'll find the middle of it. So 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, which is 2 essentially because it's an integer, floating part is discarded. So it will compare whatever is at the second index, 0, 1, 2, 7, is 7 is equal to whatever you're finding. If it is equal, we return true. If 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 the element at the middle index less than the element that we're finding, it means the element that we're finding, if it exists, must be on the right side. Right? As the array is sorted, if the element here is bigger than the value in the array, if that element exists in the array, it must only be in the right half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. But what's the point of
So
the if low is greater than high statement?
So that's our break condition. So what happens is, at eventually, so every time, let me say this. So in here, our first, this is our low, and this is our high, right? And then this is our middle. Now, when we compare 12 with 7, we realize 12 is bigger than 7, so we must go on the left half, sorry, right half. So when that happens, now our low becomes this. This is our new low. We call the method again, and we give that as a low. So when it enters this loop, it will check is low less than high, right? Right. So if it will go ahead only when low is less than high. If low becomes greater than high, it will exit. So it will go in and it will find the middle of these two. So this is index number 0, 1, 3, and this is 5. So 5 plus 3 is 8, by 2 is 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is our middle, right? And now to compare, is 12 greater than 13? Well, is it equal to 13 first? So the result is false. So it will go to the second line, which is data at this middle index less than find. Um, so in this case, 12 is 13 is is greater than 12. So it'll go to the last line, and then now what it does is, so if 12 exists, it must be to the right, and to the left of 13. Now this is our lower bound, this is our higher bound. We don't want to go all the way to the beginning. So we'll say if the element exists, it must exist between this and whatever this index is minus 1. Right? So in this case, our low becomes, so this is our new low and this is high. Right? So low and high are same, and now we try to find the middle. Um, so what is the middle of 3 is just like low plus high plus. So it is 3 plus 3 divided by 2 is 6 by 2 is equal to 3. So we get the same index. We are both are pointing to the same index. And we again go through the check. Does 12 match that? And it doesn't match. So now is 12 greater than 11? Yes, 12 is greater than 11. So now we'll assume that that 12 must be on the right half. So we'll say starting at half, like our low is this, and our high remains wherever it was. So now our low has crossed the high, uh, which means we have seen every element
Oh,
already
okay.
to the left. There's no point in going any further
Yeah.
in left or right. So wherever the two indexes cross, it means we have inspected everything. We didn't find anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. But how does it keep repeating if there's no for, like for or if or like while?
Is because this is recursion. The method calls itself. So let's debug this, and that will kind of help us real quick. So we can look at the screen here. Um, now, all right. So this is the first time when this method gets called, and we can see, you can zoom in a little. The value of low and high is 0 and 8, right? Because this array that we're passing has the 9 elements in it, right? 9 elements. So it calls find, and then this is called low and high. So if we keep debugging, I'll be like, second one. So we will find the middle. So middle is 4. Do they match? It doesn't match. So now, this is going to be interesting. So now it has called itself. The method has called itself again. So see how from here it jumped back to there. But in this case, now look at the low. It has become 5. Earlier it was 0. So that's the loop part.
What? Wait,
Okay, let's continue on this.
can you just say the last part again?
Yeah, so keep a note of high and low. Our low is 5 and high is 8, correct? Now keep observing when, oh, there it is. So after line 14, it jumped back to 10, right? And look at our low, it has changed from 5 to 7. So there's no explicit loop, it is an implicit loop because the method is calling itself with the changed parameter. So this is, we call it, the method calls itself and then changes the parameter.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Maybe let's look at one more example, and then that will make it comparatively easier to get it. And once you get it, then you know it for life. It's kind of that, you know. It's like learning a bicycle. Once you have learned it, then you don't forget it. So let's quickly look at one more example, and for that, and this is a very interesting one. So I need all of yours participation in here. Um, let's make it more interactive. Now the question is to find a factorial of n, right? So we need to find n factorial. Now how would we find? Anyone knows how to find what is the formula for finding n factorial?
By factorial, like 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1.
Correct, right? So if we can write that in a more general way, like for 5 you're right. If it is 5, then it is 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1, right? If it is 4, then it is 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. Now, can we generalize this? So n factorial is equal to n into n times n minus 1, correct? Factorial, right? So if you look at 5 factorial, we'll see 5 into that part, which is equal to 5 into 4 factorial, right? Now when we look at 4 factorial, we see 4 into this part. That is exactly same as 3 factorial, is 3 into 2 into 1. This is 4 factorial is 4 into 3 factorial, correct? You guys following me? Now similarly, 3 factorial is 3 times 2 into 1, which is exactly same as 2 factorial, right? Now, so this is equal to 3 into 2 factorial. So that is equal to 2 into 1 factorial. Because then that's, so what is 1 factorial? 1 factorial is 1 into 1. Well, 1 into essentially is 1, but this is equal to 1 into 0 factorial, correct? Now, we all know 0 factorial is 1. Now, why is it 1 is a more it's a question for a mathematician. Well, we can go over that, but then this is not the point. The point here is 0 factorial is 1, and if we closely look at our factorials, we'll realize if we have, when we have 0 factorial, it is very easy to find 1 factorial. It is, we just multiply that number with the 0 factorial, correct? So now we have 1 factorial. And 2 factorial is multiply 2 with the factorial of the previous number, right? Now we save that, and 3 factorial is 3 into whatever we have saved so far. And now we save that as well. 4 factorial is 4 into whatever we have saved so far. So similarly, n factorial is n times whatever is the factorial of n minus 1. Correct? So if we can write a program that every time it finds factorial, it saves it so that it can reuse it in the next step, then we can quickly write a factorial in a recursive manner, correct? You guys with me?
Yeah, I think so.
So when does
Yeah.
the factorial ends when we reach zero? We reach 0. So when our n is 0, the result is 1. But for a non-zero n and a positive non-zero n, our result is that number n into whatever is n minus 1 factorial. Correct? All right. So let's quickly write a program, and it'll be, so it's essentially just one line. So let's let me find a package. So I'll create a package called recursion, and in that package I'll create a class and we'll call it factorial. You know, let's call it this recursion. We will just write all the recursion program in one class. We'll not create multiple classes for each example set. Okay. All right. So we need to find a factorial, correct? So we'll say public static, and well, one of the problem with factorial is quickly the results get bigger and bigger. So if they have like a huge n, the factorial is going to overflow. So we'll keep that in mind. Just for the sake of science here, we'll say our method is going to return an integer. So if there's an overflow, well, we know that it's a known bug. And find factorial. Okay. And find factorial of what? Integer n, right? What do we say? We say here that, okay, so we're going to write a recursive mechanism. So we need a break condition. Now, where does our factorial break? Is if n is 0, then we return 1. We can't go below n, right? So we'll say if my n is equal to 0, then return 1. We all here? Because 0 factorial is equal to 1, right? If that's not the case, if n is greater than 0, then what do? We simply say, whatever the n is, my factorial is going to be n multiplied by find factorial of n minus 1. That's it. You guys with me?
Yeah.
So essentially what it is doing is, whatever parameter we pass, it multiplies that and then it calls itself. And now it reduces the parameter by 1. So, okay, let's debug this. And
Wait, so it just keeps subtracting 1 from the number?
Yeah, it saves the. Okay, so let's get back to your point here. We'll quickly write a simple run method and we'll debug this and try to see if that makes it easy. It's a public static void run my program and system.out.println. Um, let's say int n is equal to 5. Uh, and as tutorial is equal to let's quickly run this. I'll comment out the binary search. I'll say question or find factorial or 2. Okay, so when we run this, what happened?
We have a I don't think we have a variable for. Oh, never mind.
Pardon me?
I thought that we hadn't defined n. I thought that we forgot to.
No.
No,
So
no, yeah, it's fine.
So okay, so now what happened here? How did that work? And that's the right result actually. Is it? Yes, it is the right result. So let's quickly put a debug point and then let's debug it. So we'll see how this is working. So now, when we call this method for the first time, we pass 5 as a parameter, right? So the in recursion, the parameter and the internal variables, they are saved. So when a method calls itself, it goes to a different level. And as it keeps calling itself, it keeps going to a higher level. And then eventually it will come back. So when n becomes 0, the function will start coming back. And every time it comes back, it will have the previous value stored. So now we have 5 in n. And now we'll see that the function will call itself and n will become 4, but it has not forgotten 5. It saved it at a lower level. So it has called itself. So it has gone to a level up with 4, and then it will keep going. And when it comes back, it will just multiply what it has saved with whatever it has returned from upper level. So let's keep doing that. See how n is going down number. 3, 2, 1. Now n is 1, and then okay, now it is 0. So now we are going to hit this if condition. So when n is 0, it is going to return 1. Correct? Now so you observe that n is 0, which is it means we are at the highest level in our recursion. Now we are going from here. We're going to go back. So what is this going to return? It is going to return 1. So which means from the previous level when we had called this, we will in previous level our n was 1, and then we say whatever this method returns, multiply that with 1, right? And then we call the same function with 0, n equal to 0. So n equal to 0 is going to return 1. So we're going to multiply 1 with 1. So we're going to go one level back. There it is. So now you see n has become 1. So now we are at the second level. Now when we go back, prior to this, our n was 2. So we said multiply 2 with whatever this method returns. And then we said 2 minus 1. So when n is 1, we are going to return 1 into find factorial 0, which has returned 1. So essentially we're going to return just 1 back. Now we are at the third level. And so when this method was called, n was 2. So we said my result is 2 into find factorial of 1. So find factorial 1 has returned 1. So multiply 2 with 1. So that makes it 3. Now at maybe let me try to make it a little more simpler. And parameter. So I'll just save whatever parameter we have received in there, and then I'll also save int uh, result is equal to find factorial of n minus 1, right? Um, well, um, I'll call it next. What is our factorial? Int factorial is equal to whatever is the parameter, multiply that by whatever is the next factorial, correct? Well, agree with that? We save our current parameter. Uh, uh, well, let's call it m, right? And then this is n1 just to signify n minus 1. Okay? This is n minus 1. So what is the parameter? What is our factorial? Our factorial is m multiplied by n1, right? Which is to signify it's m multiplied by or n multiplied by n minus 1 factorial. Correct? And this is what we have here, n factorial is n into n minus 1, correct? So now let's debug this real quick. Okay, so this is our level 1, the very ground level. See, n is equal to 5. So we are right there on the first level. Now what is 5? What is that? 5 factorial is equal to 5 into 4 factorial. Now we need to find what 4 factorial is. We don't know. So what we do is we save 5 and then we call the method calls itself, but then now it is going to pass 5 minus 1 as a parameter. So it's going to say find the factorial of 4. I know 5, find the factorial of 4. And whenever I have that, the result is going to be this product of these two. So, boom, it called itself again. But look at n now, it's 4. So now we are trying to find, okay, we need that. What is 4 factorial? 4 factorial is 4 into 3 factorial, right? So we keep going. And then now we say, I don't know what 3 factorial is. So I'll call myself and say, I know 4, but I need to know what 3 factorial is. I'm going to call the method again. And now I say, give me 3 factorial. Right? So we come down here. 3 factorial is 3 into 2 factorial. So I know 3, but I don't know what 2 factorial is. So let me find that out. Call the method and say, give me 2 factorial. So we are at this level now. 2 factorial is 2 into 1 factorial. Right? So what is 1 factorial? We don't know. So we'll call the method and say, give me 1 factorial. So we'll come here, n is 1. What is 1 factorial? Is 1 into 0 factorial. But what is 0 factorial? Well, we don't know. So let's find it out. 0 factorial is 1, correct? So this is going to return 1. So this becomes 1 into 1. So now look at the debug here. We go back and see how we had saved the previous value of n in, and that is retained. So as we go level deeper, like back to where we started from, we had saved these numbers along the way. So the first step we saved 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and now 0 has returned 1. So we find the factorial, we return it here. This gets replaced, multiply by 2, return, that gets replaced. Did it help? Or am I just going in circles now?
I get how it saves like the values, but I still don't get how it remembers to multiply. Like for example, 5. How does it remember to multiply 5, then 4, then 3, then 2, then 1?
So it does a multiplication here, right? So it will not go to the next step unless the method has returned.
Yeah, but
So
then how does it store the 5 times 4 somewhere? Like does it store 20 somewhere?
Uh,
Sense.
so it doesn't store 20. What it does is, so this, as an example, this is equal to, so for let's say 1 into 0 factorial, you need to first know what 0 factorial is, right? Only then you can do a multiplication. So what you do is find the factorial. So you'll say factorial of 0, and then you store that in some result, let's say n1, right? So you first do that, and only then you multiply n with n1. That's a result. So what it is doing is, at every level, at first level, it doesn't reach to that. It doesn't reach to multiplication. Before it does, it says, oh, I need to find 4 factorial. So it goes deep in at the second level. It doesn't multiply yet. To have the multiplication, it has to find the 3 factorial. So first it has to find all the unknowns, and then it goes back, and now it has and can, like, did anyone have do like do you have, like, anyone has a better explanation? That would be really helpful. I think I'm not being very helpful here. Um, if anyone else has understood the concept,
Doesn't
please feel free.
doesn't it just hold all of them separately in like m, and then multiply it through like backwards? Like I don't know if that makes sense, but doesn't it hold them separately and then it multiplies, like it starts at like 1 and then it multiplies 1 times 2 and then it gets 2 and then it multiplies 2 times 3 and then it gets 6 and then it keeps going.
Yeah, that's what it does. It saves the state. So whatever variables it was, when it calls itself again, the previous call maintains the state. So when the method returns, it has already stored the value, so it can multiply. Let me see if I can put it in a visual form. So let's say our method is factorial, right? And then we have passed 5 is a big number. I'll just start with the lower number. We'll say find factorial 3, right? So what this will do is, our n is equal to 3, and n1, which is n minus 1, is equal to, for finding 3 factorial, I need 3 into whatever 2 factorial is. I don't know what that is. So let me first find that. I'll say factorial 2, which is essentially 3 minus 1, and then my result is n into n1, right? So we are on the page here. So that's there. Now what happens here? Now when the method is called first time, so our n is 3, right? When n is 3, well, things are fine. When it calls itself, now it passes 3 minus 1 as a parameter. So in the first pass, our n is 3, right? What is n1? We don't know. So it calls itself. N1 is unknown. It's question mark. Now it calls itself. So now our n is 2. So this is our second pass. Now n is equal to 2. What computer has done is, it has saved this value. It is waiting for whatever the second level has to return. So it saves that value internally into something called a stack. Okay? So now it calls itself, and in the second level, n is 2. What is n1? N1 we don't know. N1 is actually factorial of n 2 minus 1. So it goes to third depth, and it says, give me factorial of 1. For that, when this is called, it's 2, and then we say 2 minus 1. So now it's called again, and this is 1, and we say 1 minus 1. So our n1 is what? Question mark, which is 0 factorial, right? So when it calls itself, the fourth depth is our n is 0 now. So when n is 0, we return 1. So when our n is 0, do we need n1 at all? We don't know. We don't need it because there's nothing beyond 0 factorial. So we return back. So from here we go back here. Okay? So this n1 gets replaced by so this is replaced by 1. So this becomes 1. So we multiply n and n1, and then we go a level up. We try to fill that question mark here, and then whatever result is here goes back here. It's kind of a cascading.
Wait, so it multiplies backwards, like after it finds everything?
Yeah. So every time it finds an unknown and calls a method, it waits. The program at that level is waiting for whatever the next call will return. So when it returns, it just multiplies those two. So now at this level, it won't return unless the next level returns a result. So the program is waiting there. I know I need to find out what n1 is. So it'll wait there for you to find n1. So it'll call itself. So the method is just waiting on itself to get the unknowns. That's why we need a break condition, because if you don't have a break condition, the method will keep calling itself and your program is going to keep waiting at every level for the previous level to complete. And if there's no break condition, it will never complete. So when there's a break condition and the program starts going back, it just keeps going back to a previous level where it had been waiting. Maybe let's look at one more example. Let's see if that helps us. Okay. This is, wish I had a more simpler example, but let's try. We may not, we can actually write it, it's not a big deal. So the question is, you have this method. Let me try it. Okay, so you have this method called sum of n, right? Now what this does is, it's a very interesting thing it does. So when it is sum of n, what it expects you to return back is 1 upon n plus 1 upon n minus 1. Keep doing that plus 1, which means if your n is equal to 1, well, what do you return when n is 1? You return 1, right? Where n is 2, then you return half plus 1, right? Because 1 by 1 may become, this is equal to half plus 1, right? So essentially, let's look at this again. So when your n is 1, you are actually returning 1 upon 1. When n is 2, you're returning half plus 1 upon 1. Where n is 3, you must return 1 by 3 plus half plus 1 by 1. Right? You're following me now? If n is 4, you return 1 by 4 plus 1 by 3 plus half plus 1 by 1. Now, what we see here is there is a repetition. It is just one thing that we are doing is we have this 1 upon 1. This is known to be, the result is 1, we know that, correct? When n is 2, what exactly is this? This is equal to 1 upon whatever my n is plus sum of n minus 1, correct? You guys with me?
Yeah.
So if n is 2, it is half. Okay. So sum of 1 is equal to 1 upon 1, correct? Now, sum of 2 is equal to half plus sum of 1, correct? Because that's there. Now what is n equal to 3? This thing is common right here. So this is equal to sum of 3 is 1 by 3 plus sum of 2. So whatever n is minus 1. Now if you look at 4, we see this part is same as sum of 3. These two are same. So sum of 4 is equal to 1 by 4 plus sum of 3, correct? So similarly, our sum of 5 will be equal to 1 upon 5 plus sum of 5 minus 1, right? Which is sum of 4. So we can keep doing that and we'll realize sum of n is equal to 1 upon n plus sum of n minus 1, correct? Now that's where recursion comes in. Is now when we are finding the nth result, to compute this, we know what n is. When it is sum of 5, we know n is 5, but we don't know what sum of 4 is. So we need to find it. So when we go finding this result, our program waits here for us at this level. It goes to a higher level. It goes to, so when we are at n4, we know this 1 by 4 plus whatever is the result. So we save this, we go to higher level, we solve the problem, we come back and replace this whole thing with whatever. So our program waits here and then it replaces this part with whatever this method has to return. Right? I hope it helped a little. The point here is the original problems looks complex. We need to break it down to a very simple level. What is the simplest level we have broken down that whole problem into? Is this one line. It says, give me any number. I know what one upon that number is, and then I'll add to that whatever n minus 1 is going to return me. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find it out, and whenever it finds it, comes back and replaces that with that. So similar to that, when we were looking at factorial n, we know n, and then we said factorial n minus 1, right? So when this gets called, so let's say if n is 3, then our factorial is 3 into factorial of 2. Now what is factorial of 2? This function is going to return 2 into 1. So when this is returned back, the same thing becomes 3 into 2. So when a program sees a method, it goes and runs the method first. Whatever is the result, brings it back, and then does a product, and then goes back down a level 1. Maybe PK can explain the Tuesday session. But think about it and click on it. It's not very intuitive, but when you practice few things, it'll just become like you will get it.
Yeah, so I'll draw a chart and explain to them.
Yeah. So that's why it's just one idea, and then it has 5% in the AP coursework. In fact, in a lot of interviews, they expect people to kind of understand recursion. It's a very commonly used way of looping. I'm running out of ideas on if I can further break it down. If something comes up to me, I'll definitely reflect on this again in the next session. But in the interest of time, let's move on. Let's take a break from it. We'll come back. All right. So, whew, it sounded like a math lesson today. That was not the uh, objective, though. But anyhow, it's a good math refresher. So let's move on to another topic. We have 20 minutes, maybe 22 minutes. We'll have to cover as much as possible. And next session, we'll actually write a game. And uh, Yash, if you can, do you want to present like few minutes next session and talk about the game that you had written?
The one that I showed in as an example in my presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, fine. So we look at what Yash has done in his prior experience with game writing in Java, and then we write our own little game. Okay, so let's move on to a comparatively relaxing topic. We'll come back to recursion. We'll come back to recursion. Better examples. So the next topic I had in mind was inheritance. It has a decent exam weightage, 5 to 10%. Now we have looked at inheritance in past. We have looked at multiple OOPS concepts in past, including inheritance. But this is a separate topic by itself, is because um, it simplifies programming and makes code reusable a lot. So what is inheritance? Ability to create a new class from existing classes inheritance in terms of programming language. But we all kind of understand inheritance. We inherit qualities from our parents. We inherit habits from our friends and so on and so forth. Depends on context. But the idea here is to just reuse something that already exists. So inheritance allows a class to acquire the properties of another class. So you don't have to rewrite it. The child inherits from the parent, right? So parent has some qualities of child has some qualities of the parent in them. Increases code usability is because the child doesn't have to worry about rewriting the same thing again and again. It can just use whatever parent has. So you're reusing the same piece of code. So as we are reusing, it reduces coding time because we don't have to write again. And as we are not writing it again, there's less chances of errors. We can be sure that whatever parent has implemented is error-free. The child can use it without a problem. Continuing with inheritance, in Java, every class that you make, every class that exists inherits from this one base class called object with a capital O. In this example, it is about a bunch of professionals, right? A professional type object is an object. Now, a teacher is a professional, a Java is an engineer is a professional, a doctor is a professional, right? They all are professionals. They do different things, but then they are all professionals. There could be a Java teacher or a history teacher. They both teach different subjects, but they're a teacher. So there's a lot of common things that they do, which makes them teachers. Similarly, there could be mechanical engineer, civil engineer, electrical engineer, and they do different jobs, but there is something common which makes them an engineer. Maybe some kind of coursework they have taken or whatever qualifications. Similar to doctors, a surgeon and a physician, they both are doctors. Why are they doctors? Because they have something in common, maybe some courseworks or something which ties them together, which makes a doctor, no matter physician or a surgeon. A surgeon can be a neurosurgeon or a cardiosurgeon, right? They both are surgeons, but they focus on different areas. Now, when we look at this example, we observe that the higher we go in the inheritance order, the more abstract things become. What does a professional mean? What does an object mean? Is there a definite meaning of an object? Maybe not. What is a professional? It's a very loose term. What is a meaning of a teacher? One who teaches, but teaches what? Those are kind of as we keep going down the hierarchy, things become more clearer and clearer, right? A Java teacher is a teacher who teaches Java. Now it is more certain than just being a teacher. An electrical engineer is someone who works on some electrical related stuff and not on construction like civil does. So we observe that as we go down the hierarchy, things become more and more concrete, more and more exact. And as we go higher and higher in hierarchy, it is more and more abstract. It's more and more loose. And can a cardiosurgeon do neurosurgery? Maybe not, but they both are surgeons. Right? Can a surgeon prescribe a medication? Yes, they can, because they are also doctor like a physician is. So doctor can give a prescription, and surgeon and physician, they both inherit it. A surgeon can perform surgery. A neuro and a cardiosurgeon inherits not only the surgery part of it, but they also inherit writing prescriptions. Now, as they are professionals, they also inherit paying taxes on their income, right? In a way. So see how, let's say the professional deals with paying taxes, how automatically that trickles down to the child classes. Every child class has to pay tax on their income. And they do these common things, but they also do very specific activity. Like a cardio surgeon can prescribe medication, can do surgery, but specializes in cardio. I hope it helped to understand inheritance, that we can inherit properties from our parent without rewriting it again and again. So there's a concept of superclass and subclass. The superclass is a root class. So in the hierarchy, we looked at the class object is a superclass of all classes in Java. It's a holy grail. Classes that extends from superclasses are called subclasses. Now, can a subclass be further extended? Yes, a subclass can have further subclasses. So in context of electrical engineer, that's a subclass of a superclass called engineer. But engineer is a subclass to a superclass called professional. Professional is a subclass of a superclass called object. So it's kind of a relative term based on what you are comparing or the perspective. Now, the keyword extends is used to establish an inheritance relationship between classes. So how do we say one class inherits from the other? So in Java, there's a keyword called extends. The moment there is class X extends from Y, it means X is a child of Y. It will inherit everything from Y automatically. You don't have to write it. Only public and protected methods and properties get inherited. So a parent class may have a lot of its internal workings. And you don't want to inherit all of that. You just want to inherit what is required by the child classes. Else your child class will become a mess. It will have unnecessary things that it never wanted. So remember public, private, and all these access visibility keywords. So everything that is public in and protected in the parent class gets inherited. A public element or property method gets inherited as public. A protected gets inherited as protected. A private methods, private properties, and constructors don't get inherited. So every class gets to keep their constructor. You can't inherit the constructor. So when we talk about constructor in inheritance, it needs a special attention. Is because well, we have to write a program for that. How much time do we got? We have like less than 15 minutes. So let's Mm-mm-mm. You know what? Let's skip the program part for this session. We'll take it up in the next session. I think 15 minutes is a little less time to cover all that. Um, so let's just get ready for the next session. In the meantime, we'll not our program won't be functional, but then we'll just create a structure for that at least. So in your in IntelliJ, in the source package, create another package called uh, inheritance. So we can write every inheritance related program in its own package. Create a package for inheritance, and in there, we'll try to replicate this hierarchy of objects we just saw. This thing. So we're going to create a class professional. We're going to create class engineer, teacher, doctor, and a few of these concrete classes. So let's start with the first class is professional. So in the inheritance, create a class called professional. There it is. So what is the first ask okay, so we'll just create empty classes, right? So we're not going to write the body. We'll just create these classes for now. We'll create another class. So from professional, there are three professions we have: teacher, engineer, and a doctor, right? So we'll create first we start with a class called teacher, right? And then that is the second professional we have. Well, so how do we know teacher is extending, like is inheriting from professional? So there's a keyword called extends professional. It means now teacher is a type of professional. It inherits from professional. Professional is a superclass, teacher is a subclass. Similar to that, we'll create another class called engineer. And then engineer is a professional. So remember, inheritance is the type of relationship is a relationship. So an engineer is a professional, right? So it's from professional. There it is, as simple as that. In another class, we call it doctor. And this extends from professional. Doctor professional. Now we'll go back to our teacher, and remember there were two teachers. We had Java teacher and a history teacher, right? So we'll not write all teachers here. We'll just, for the sake of simplicity, we'll just have one teacher. So we're learning Java, in the spirit of that, we'll say the Java teacher. And Java teacher is a teacher, so it extends from teacher. So we're saying Java teacher inherits everything that teacher class has to offer. So we're not writing any code as of now. We're just creating these empty structures. We'll fill it up next time. Okay. What is the next profession we have? We had an engineer. So let's have an electrical engineer. So we'll say electrical engineer. Electrical engineer is a type of engineer. So we'll say this extends engineer. So this is a subclass of a superclass called engineer. Now we'll come to so in doctor we had a physician and a surgeon. So we'll skip a physician for now. We'll have a surgeon, surgeon, so that kind of can build upon it. And surgeon is extends doctor, right? Say surgeon is a doctor, is a type of doctor, and then we create just one more class and call it a neurosurgeon. And, Okay, what is it? Where is it? So this extends. Now our structure is kind of there. Now we'll to keep our main program clean, we'll create another Java class. It has nothing to do with inheritance, but this is where we'll write our program to understand inheritance. So we'll say, we'll just call it inheritance runner. Right? We'll do run our inheritance essentially. Use a different name. I just came up with some name. And then as we will write all our program here, we'll say public static void run my program. For main, we can just call this, and we can write our program here instead of all in one giant main. All right. So we have 6 minutes before we are at the end of time. So any questions?
No, none for me.
Okay. So in that case, let's call it an evening, and thank you all for attending to this session. I'll see you all next time, and we'll continue with our inheritance example, and we'll discuss about this recursion, if I can come up with a better example, or else book a slot with a PK on Tuesday, and we can also explain that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
I think Kumar said he wanted to talk to me or something.
I think he'll reach out to you, but essentially let me fill you in about